Okay, I thought I would do a video. I haven't done one for about a year and a half or maybe more. So we'll see how this goes. It's on the American Civil War 1861 to 1865 game by B.Shelly and J.Reiser. And it's a strategy and tactics game from summer 1983. It was when Strategy and Tactics was owned by TSR. So it's one of my favourite games, my favourite war games, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. So I don't actually have the Strategy and Tactics. I got it secondhand, so I just have it in this binder. I just got the game, and it has a small bit of errata and some clarification is needed on one thing to do with beginning riverine points and what happens to leaders at certain points. For example, if they're overrun and all their SPs are destroyed, stuff like that. Just those two things, I think. I just played a game of it. I played it 3 or 4 times before, which makes it one of my most played war games. And I mean, there's some like SL I played lots, but other ones get played once and sort of done, or and then now I'm sort of trying to work through all my games. But anyway, so I haven't done much solo play despite the all the restrictions of last year for a long time. I don't know, I just kind of, with everything that was going on, I kind of lost sort of morale for Wargame, even though it would have made sense to play it solo a lot. I think it was also partly because my son was off school a lot, so I was with him, and I didn't really sort of have the time and space to do it. But anyway, so this is the American Civil War, and the reason why I think I like it so much is these are actually the original counters. Sorry, I just sidetracking a minute. Just so you can get some idea of what's going on. Let me get that into focus. Okay. So the point being that these pieces you can see on the map are fan-made pieces. I'm sorry, I didn't collect the name before I started the video. So they're sort of jolly nice. There's I had to make some amendments to them because there was some unclarity in terms of excuse me a minute, I'll just put this phone down while I open this bag really quickly because I can't do it with one hand, and I need to show you the counters. So there's nothing wrong. I would have quite happily played it with the original counters, and I have done, like I said, a few times, but mine came really badly cut. So you can see, for example, this piece is a 2 strength points. The 2's cutting off the bottom, so I wrote 2 on myself, and so forth, and likewise fortifications and so forth. So it was nice to get a sort of cleaner set of counters to go with it. Like I said, without the bad, I mean, I played it happily with the badly cut. Didn't sort of stop my enjoyment. I'm finding this a great game, but and the counters as they were perfectly serviceable. Just that's a leader, and these fan-made ones on Board Game Geek entry for the game have leaders' pictures, which is great. So I think what makes it such a great game, it came out at the same time as the Civil War 1861 to 1864, which is a bigger game, box game. I have it, I've played it, and it sort of uses a similar sort of activation system, similar in some ways, but it's kind of like a bigger game, so it's just I think it's probably, you would say, for what it is, I'm not going to say the Civil War is a better game than this. It's because I think they equal. For me, they are equal to each other in their class, in that this is smaller, is kind of it doesn't take so long to play, and so you're kind of expecting less. The other one's a bigger game, takes longer, and it's more involved. Excellent. I find this excellent in its class. So you can see the graphics. These are the gaps. You've got rivers which are either coastal or main rivers, or tidal rivers, or just normal rivers. Normal rivers are mostly these ones around here. They cannot be run into by riverines or coastal transport or river transport, but other rivers like these ones here, and of course classically the Mississippi, for much of its length, not for some of those tributaries, can be tracked by riverines. And here you have so you've got, what's it, St. Louis there, and Cincinnati here. There's another place as well, but these are where the US are going to build riverines. So the US riverines are factored into it, not the CSA ironclads and so forth. So it's abstracted out. Basically, the US had the ascendancy in the river power. So it's just featured that way. So the riverines can come into play around this area mostly, and you get some naval transport. So the game starts with McClellan on the peninsula there, Fort Monroe. Funny, because actually the game starts with you set up with fixed strength points. Then the US gets 3 strength points to put wherever they like. The CS 5 strength points to put wherever they like. So they get a chance to kind of answer the US. If the US is going to sort of make a build up force here, the CSA can answer it, and also perhaps make a thrust of their own. Funnily enough, but the leaders are added. There's 5 US and 4 CSA leaders added at the beginning of the game. As you can see, they're untried, so we don't know who they are. Funnily enough, my last game, this was actually McClellan. And the leaders come in 2 forms. There's a 1-star, 2-star, and then Grant's is special. He can be 3-star. But that's for their ranking. Then they also have a seniority rating to determine who sort of ranks in seniority if you have sort of multiple 2-star leaders in an army, for example. And so leaders, you have 20 US, 19 CSA in untried, and they're like a force pool you pull from. And then these are many of them are 1-star. Some of them can only ever be 1-star, like Forrest on the CSA. He's only ever 1-star general. He can't get promoted. Others can be promoted to 2-star, and these are the ones that can be promoted. And then there's also some that start the game 2-star. And the 2-star ones you want, because with those you can then from game turn 3 onwards start building armies. It's a 16-turn game. There's a game track here. There's also on the Board Game Geek, there's some handy summary sheets for combat tables and game track and sub notifications. And it's very handy because, like me, I'm this track, you would have to sort of sit on the southern side to read this track, and this is for the game turns. Now there's quite a few things that happen every game turn generally in the reinforcement phase. So for example, game turn 1 is summer 1861. You have 3 movement phases, and this is the movement points each unit can use. So, and there's no terrain cost, so you can move through the wilderness, over a river, etc. You can't move over tidal rivers. So a lot of the Mississippi cannot be marched over by armies. But otherwise you can just move 5 hexes, 5 hexes, 5 hexes. Fall starts decreasing, winter 333, maximum spring starts increasing again towards the end. Then you have victory point differentials. So if at winter turn 7, 1863, the CSA have 45 more victory points than the US, they win the game at that point, and it decreases down. So the US have to start gaining victory points before the US gain an automatic victory point. Similarly, also with that, is if at any point the CSA get 30 more victory points than the US, then foreign intervention is deemed to have occurred, and that results in less naval points and some other things which I can't remember because it hasn't happened to me yet. So restrictions on the US. Then these are naval resource points. So the naval resources are abstracted. You have a handy track for it here, and essentially the US gains that number each turn, and they can save them or spend them. They spend them either at a certain point. They can spend 5 to build a riverine. They can do that once a turn. After turn 11 they can build 2 of those, and they can have a maximum, I think, 8 riverine points, but they're very useful. They're basically a column shift in combat where a river hexside is involved. Or they can use them to supply armies in coastal spaces, so that will include this one. This dark black line counts as a coastal space. And down here in Fort Pickens. So the US needs to supply these. Supply is very simple. Basically, if you're out of supply, you get marked. If you would be marked again out of supply the next turn, then you have your SPs there, and it just goes on like that. Otherwise, there's no effect. It's quite simple and very effective. You don't want to be unsupplied for more than one turn. And then they can also use their NRPs to, so they would spend 1 NRP to supply 1 SP. So they would need 3 at the beginning of the game, and they only have 1. So some of those are going to be unsupplied, and then they're going to have to be supplied the next turn. But as you can see, the next turn they get some, and so forth. Some more. So and then they can use them to transport. So for example, from any of these places, the green ones are ports. They're all cities marked here. A city, a major city, and green ones are ports. So from a port you can disembark and potentially do sea assault, or just embark at another friendly port, etc. So what else do we have? Then we have each US department, there's 3, will get this number of reinforcements, so none on the first turn, and then you get this number of free, which you can distribute between the 3 departments and any armies within marching range of a major city in one of your departments. The CSA get the same, but they only have 2 departments, so you can see although it's 4-6 and 4-6, they have 3 departments, so there's 3 times 4 and only 2 times 4 there. And at a certain point the US can start spending NRPs, their choice 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. If it's 1862, then they need to spend minimum of 10. They roll a die. If they get the first number or less on the die, then the second number is subtracted from those 3 reinforcements. So you can see it's not so effective at 62, but in 65 they can stop 4 reinforcement points a turn for the CSA. Then there's cavalry. Now cavalry it's just that you get these points. So the US don't start getting them until turn 10, I believe, yes. And the CSA start with them at the beginning. Essentially all it means is it gives you a peek at a stack. So it's very effective. So the CSA can peek at one US stack, see the strength point underneath the leader. Otherwise you can see them, but if there's a leader you don't know how many strength points are underneath. You can see they go up to 2, 3, and then it starts decreasing into 0 for them, and then the US start gaining cavalry. I said didn't see and peek at those stacks, the cavalry scouting. And then there's the CSA Trans Mississippi victory points. essentially all it means is that as long as they can get a supply line of hexes from any major city, so that's Shreveport, Little Rock, potentially Springfield, I think that counts, even though it's in this brown neutral territory. The CSA taken possession of that at this point when the game starts. So one of those major cities, or Jackson, over to a major city across on the other side of the Mississippi, then they get the Trans-Mississippi bonus. So that's a major point the US want to stop, because you can see my last game it ended on turn 11. The USA hadn't stopped that, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 victory points by turn 11. Then you can see, say, if the CSA had taken Cairo, that's 20 victory points. There's 10 St. Louis, that would be 30. So bang, they've got intervention, and by turn 11 they only need a victory differential of 25, and in fact they had, I think, 28, and the US had taken 3, because they'd taken, where had they taken? They had taken it's been a long time. Staunton, isn't it? That is, and somewhere else minor from the oh no, they're taken back Springfield, but okay, sorry, so the CSA had 30 something, but anyway, so the USA, they have, I was trying to get a win with the USA, but it was really sort of a relearning game. Really want to, be going for places like Nashville, that's 10 points. Memphis is only 5, but obviously that's towards you cutting the Mississippi and the east and west theatres. Richmond is 25 points, so it's not a game win, but it's 25 points. Similarly, Washington is 25 points. Not game winners on their own. And also leaders, yes. So leaders, if leaders are ever sort of, if leaders die, then if it's a 1-star leader, your opponent gets 5 victory points. If it's a 2-star leader, your opponent gets 10 victory points. And leaders can die basically through disasters, which is if they lose all their SPs in their stack, or there's one other case I've forgotten off the top of my head right now. So you roll for disaster. On a K they are dead, on a W they're wounded, they go on the turn track, and then you have to roll every turn for them, and they can potentially die from their wounds, which is victory points to the opponent, 11 or 12. So you see, they don't die very often, but it is risky. There's another way they can die, is if you're in battle, there's 3 combat results tables. If the attacker has between 1 to 3 attacking strength, you use table A, between 4 to 12, table B, so it depends on the attacker, and up to 24, which is the most you can have. That would only ever be in an army. A leader like this, who hasn't, you haven't brought an army, coordinated an army together, can have maximum 6 strength points. So just at the beginning of the game, you're on table A or B, and you go up to table C from turn 3 onwards. And you have these rosters to mark the strength points for the 2 armies. But anyway, so the combat tables are generally 1 and disrupted, or 2 and disrupted. So you don't lose huge amounts of strength points. Even if you're committing a large amount, say you're on parity, you're only going to lose 1-2 strength points each. You probably, if you're attacking into bad terrain, you always lose an extra. Your opponent may also lose an extra for fighting and defending in bad terrain. But the point is the disruption. Now, if you're disrupted, and your opponent isn't disrupted, well, if you're the defender and you're disrupted, the attacker doesn't, then the defender has to retreat and the attacker can then retreat in. The attacker's disrupted, he can't advance. The attacker would advance in, but if he's disrupted, he can't advance. And also, if you're disrupted, or they call it demoralized in this fan-made thing, but it's called disrupted in the rules, you get a column shift. And because you have those 3 phases, like movement allowance and what phase 1, 2 and 3 of the movement phase. So essentially what you do is you commit certain, I'll show you, I'll play a bit through a turn. You spend command points to sort of commit to move certain stacks, and then they can fight. They don't have to, but they can fight. So you could move and then fight in your first turn, and then your opponent, if he hasn't got enough command points or isn't able to move away, you could then activate. You might not move, but you need to be activated. You need to spend the command points if you just want to fight, and then fight again against a demoralized enemy. So being demoralized is not so great. So what you might do straight after combat is try and rally, and if you rally, your leader has again a chance of dying or wounding or actually rallying, and so to 2d6 you will add your leader's skill rating, and the skill ratings range from you've got 2 here. You've got Grant is plus, that's the efficiency on the left, which is how many command points it costs to move stack with it, and this is the skill rating. So Grant's plus 3, and then you've got plus 2 here, -1. It goes all the way down to -3 for some of the US ones. So you can see the better leaders get a better chance of rallying, but not super duper. So it's a risk. But I think probably I didn't do it in the last game. I didn't risk it because of that swing. But I think towards the end of the game, when you might want to, you're in some desperate measures, you might say, well, look, I can either rally this force or else I'm probably going to lose the game, and I make the risk. I might lose the game anyway because my leader, 2-star leader, say dies, and that's 10 victory points to my opponent. So that's a big swing. So that's sort of and you've got, so essentially you've got the rail lines. So supply is traced along rail lines, and you can see, so it stops here, which isn't so good, or along rivers, so you can trace along the Mississippi and so forth, or like here. This is obviously a crucial point because the US can supply so you have to go from a supply source which is back here for the US on the edge, up to here, and then you can go all the way into Confederate territory. So obviously these rail lines are crucial. So fighting is going to be concentrated around the rail lines and the major rivers for supply, as I guess is historically correct. So for the CSA, supply is from their supply sources is not the edge of the map in the Atlantic Ocean, but a major city has to be connected to another major city, and then either of them could act as supply sources, and you either have to be adjacent to those supply sources or rivers or railway. A major city can act as a supply source as long as it's connected to a terminal supply source. So, for example, the CSA could be there, and they get supply from there or there. They're on the railway, they could get supply to there anyway. But that's it. Once they move off here, they're in the wilderness, they're on their own. So as you know, they could move out there. At the beginning of the next turn, they would be marked out of supply. Then they have all that turn to get back, get into supply, or find it some other where else. They'll start losing their forces. So with those 3 movement phases, you have a lot of opportunities sort of to correct yourself. But the problem is you have the limited CPs, so you have to be careful. And I think that brings me to sort of why I like this game so much, is because it's very tight. If this game was just sort of wide open, a bit like For the People, although you've got restrictions because of the cards and your points and so forth, there's still a lot more ability. So I'm a little bit bamboozled by that game. With this game, there's a sort of wide open scope. Like the last turn I started that, I was reinforcing, I put at least one strength point in all the coastals of the CSA, because I thought I don't want any invasion in my back yard. I don't want sort of two front attack to go on, and I fortified around here to stop this, which was very effective as it were. It just cost loads of naval points to the US to keep that supplied, and didn't really get anywhere. So theoretically, you've got lots of points. The US could evade here or here or here or here, but because of the CP restriction, you have to just select a few major routes. And so you don't have sort of lots of piddly slideshows. So in actual fact, what you tend to find is, though you might have lots of, say, 3 or 4 stacks here, they're all concentrating towards one major mission. And until you start getting them culminating together into an army, you're spending a lot of command points. Once the armies get going, you've generally got a 2-star leader who's generally 1 efficiency, which means it's only 1 CP. Otherwise, untried, it costs 2 CP, and other leaders cost 2. 2's the maximum CP cost for any leader, but you have between 6 and 10 CP. So the way it works is there's these 6 counters, and one's a 6, one's a 9, there's 2 8s, there's a 10, and there's a 7. And both sides take from that. So one might get the 10 and one might get the 6. You mark them down here, and it's secret. I'll show you how it works when I start with the turn. That is, so, say if you've got the 6, that's 3 leaders you could activate, and in 3 phases, that's for the whole turn. So that's either 1 leader 3 times, or 1 leader, different leader each phase, or some combination of that. If you have 10, you have a bit more option. You can also build forts. Bit ahistorically, it's quite handy for the CSA to early on build a fortified line up here, and that stops the US from invading quite handily. But obviously not so easy to sort of cause that blockage that way. There are zones of control, so if you're in a zone of control of enemy stack, even if it's just 1 point, you can't move to another zone of control. So like here, this guy is either he can move back or he's stuck. He can't move there or there because there's that zone of control of that fellow there. Is blocked by tidal and I think major rivers. So obviously with those you can do some skirting around. But there is overrun, so if you have 5-1 ascendancy over your opponent, so not there, but say if this is 6 strength points, you can just march straight over him, costing you just 1 movement point essentially. So there is that. But yeah, so you might find you're using leaders to just block railway lines, hold back areas from hasty invasion, and then just moving up 1 or 2, like 1 army and maybe a leader as a flanking force. The armies are great. You have a commanding leader, and then you can have up to 4 other supporting leaders, and these ones can add dice roll modifiers. You just roll a d6 minus 2, and that is the number of however many of those leaders you have. So if you roll 4, you can have, and there's 2 leaders, you have the first and the second will join in, and it's in terms of their ranking and seniority. So it starts sort of a bit disparate, and although potentially there's a lot of mobility, the CP cost is quite high. Then you'll start moving to the armies, and then there's fewer stacks but greater mobility. which is kind of like an interesting dynamic, at least in terms of CP cost, not necessarily in terms of terrain and zones of control. So without further ado, I think let's start. So I've done all the setup, and essentially what I've done, the US, not very subtly, spent all their extras to build up this, because like I said, we don't want the CSA to get a fortified line here, so the US want to burst through. Otherwise they have to essentially come all the way around through the gap, and it just takes a bit longer. So they want to sort of push through so they can really get going. It's very difficult to fight in the swamps because both attack and defender take big losses, no matter, in addition to the combat results chart. You see here it's quite nifty. This, if you're in the wilderness, the defender always adds 1. So if there's any sort of special terrain, either there's combat's prohibited, or the defender gets +1 strength, which is nice because if you're strength 1, that makes you 2. So that's the difference between, if this was a 6 stack, that's the difference between 6 to 1 or 3 to 1, isn't it? So it's a big difference for small forces. But that's the maximum. It's +1 for rivers, wilderness, which is the name for this. You can see mountainous areas are untraversable gaps, add that +1, swamps. But then you see also losses, so attack or defender. So the attack and defender automatically take 1 and 1 loss, plus whatever you get on the combat results chart. In the swamp, the attacker's always going to take 3. Maybe they get 1 more as well too, so that could be 4 or 5 losses, and the defender's going to take 2. So that really is, you have to be crazy to do that. You know, there could obviously be places where it might be advantageous. You start out with 2 as the US. You've got a lot of forces here in Washington. That's kind of supports. You can use them as a threat to maybe suddenly, you know, build up that, and then the CSA will say, okay, I have to keep forces back here. But otherwise that's a stinker to battle through the swamps. You've got swamps here on the Mississippi as well, otherwise down in Florida and so forth. So generally, like through gaps and so forth, the defender gets a bonus and the loser takes extra strength point loss in combat. Nicely done. So, you know, the combat is not too grainy. It's just very simple and effectively moves things forward. So we start on turn 1, and I could have sworn that we have to miss a lot of things, but so essentially what you do is you start with a command phase, and as I said, you have to, it says put these in the cup, but then when you draw them you're not supposed to show your opponent. Oh yeah, no, it was only playing solo. Oh yeah, it was these, you're supposed to draw them blind from a cup. So from a cup, obviously you could accidentally go, oh no, I've seen who that is. So I put them down like that. But anyway, playing solo, I just draw the 2 CPs. I don't know what they are to start with. Put 1 there. So that's the US one. That's the CSA. If you have separate tracks, if you're playing opposed, you would look at yours and then put it down here. And there was some errata because the rules said a slightly different way to do this. I think it probably worked both ways, but this is good. So you look at yours, you put it on the 0, and then you would give a bid. And the bid is however many CPs you want, but say you bid 3 and the CSA bids 0, that means that the first movement phase you have to spend at least 3 CPs. Now, obviously that could be not a problem, but often, you know, it's nice to be the second player and to have CPs left to sort of respond to what the other player's doing. But sometimes you want to bid high to be the first player, and then it's kind of like, oh, you know, I've only got 6 CPs, but I need to go first. Do I bid just 1 or 2? I only need to move 1 guy, really, so I only need 1 CP, but I want to make sure I get it. So, you might have to sort of commit yourself earlier than you might like to. Obviously, you don't get that when you're playing solo. And I've always made the US bid 1 CP unless I think the CSA want to go first, and then they're going to I'll give them a bid of 2 or something like that and let them go first for once, a roll of dice, just to see if they manage to get it, because generally the US, the onus is on the US to take territory, because the CSA are going to gain victory points just by holding the Trans-Mississippi open. And also so the US, I put their starting free placement forces here to go there, so the CSA, I added a little bit more there just to respond to that, and then the rest I put some here, and I even put 1 here. That's probably foolish, but it's what I did last game. Is I actually had Forrest here, and he's +2 skill. That was great and very fortunate. So he moved in, he took Jefferson City very quickly, and then he was threatening St. Louis, which is 10 victory points for. So he sort of tied up a lot of US until he was pushed out. So I might sort of try that. But essentially, at the beginning, you've got 5 movement points. So yes, the CSA can go to Cairo, as they did they not? Or at least tried. My memory fails me, but so there's that. They can move straight in there if they have the first move. If they don't, the US can get the first move and put someone in there to block them. So I think we'll have to have a dice off for that at the beginning, now that I've noticed that, which I didn't the last game. So Kentucky is neutral, so there's no victory points to be gained in Kentucky. Missouri's ostensibly neutral, but these are owned by the they are counted as friendly to the US, and the rail network, I put that here just right, the whole rail network is US to start. So Kentucky, so Missouri, West Virginia and Kentucky are counted as neutral. Kentucky, the first person to invade it, then it goes to the other side. Otherwise there's some die rolling, and if nothing conclusive has happened on turn 11 or 12, it automatically goes over to the US. I believe that's correct. No, it's West Virginia that will automatically go over to the US if nothing's happened on turn 12. Otherwise, there's some die rolling to be done. So these are kind of a bit in dispute, but there's some victory points in West Virginia to be taken. The victory points, by the way, are interesting in that, say, if the CSA take Cairo and then it's taken off them, they don't lose those victory points. That stays with them just for having taken it at a certain point. So I suppose because it counts towards intervention, also realistically it has held up the US, it will provide stimulus towards ending the war earlier than it might have done historically. Okay, so so we start with the command phase, and then we do the bid, and then we go, so yes, I better do the bid. So what should we say? I'm just going to do a dice off, and 1 to 3 USA get it, and they'll have to spend 2 CPs for it. So they get it, so they're spending 2. That's not that many, is it? I know, let's do it. No. I'm just disappointed because I wanted the CSA to grab that early on. But essentially that commits the US to move. Oh no, that's a point, because then they move out of St. Louis. But they can move a unit on the railway to Cairo. So, okay, we'll leave it at that. So CSA bid 1 and the US bid 2, so they win the bid, so they'll be going first in all those movement phases. Then we go to supply, to the rally phase. So this is where, if you don't rally immediately after and risk that death, then you have to wait till the end of all those phases and the beginning at this point, the beginning of the next turn, and you automatically rally from the disruption, but there's 50% chance you lose an SP point. Supply phase, I spoke about supply. Blockade phase, so again I spoke about the blockade. The US isn't in any position to spend on that. Oh, but the supply, yeah, I do have to do that. And so essentially the US have one NRP, they're going to spend it to keep that one in supply, and then the two that are here are now out of supply. Okay, so then we go to the meat and potatoes of this beginning portion, the reinforcement phase. So we can start creating armies on turn 3, otherwise first the US, then the CS decides. Yeah, that's another interesting thing with an army, and not quite sure why this is, but say your army's on the roster is, let me show you from my last game. So the US Army, so the Army of the Mississippi, sorry about the dimness, let me take it out of here so you don't get the glare as well. I'll focus in. So the US Army of the Mississippi, the strength was 19 and it sustained 6 losses that turn. Now, you don't actually subtract the losses from that, so even if you sustain, say, 19 losses in that turn, you would still fight with 19 losses in all 3 of those movement and combat phases. And it's only at this point where we are in the game that you would then subtract the losses from your strength, and then you might find you've got no army left, which is kind of a bit weird. And so it gives another major benefit to the armies in that you can just fight all winter long without losing any of your strength. The way I kind of rationalise it is that, well, the armies, each army's going to have reserves, and so even though you might become a bit bedraggled, you're still going to be able to sort of keep going whole season long, calling in your reserves, but then you might find that you sort of collapsed at the end of the season, but not during the season. It's a little weird, a little difficult to kind of rationalise, but that's the way the game plays, and it plays fine. Yeah, so then at this point we would do that, we would check for that, then we check for the NRPs, so there's no reinforcements, and we would place reinforcements and we would place leaders, but I'm sure I've missed something in the rules this time around, that we skip these sections of game turn 1. Then we would build fortifications, then we would build riverines if we were the US and it was game turn 4 or later, and then we go to the first campaign phase. So there's 1, 2 and 3, then we have a siege phase, and then we go to the final game turn stuff. So the first campaign phase, as we know, it's the US who are going first. So essentially what he does is he says, at this point as solo I check, okay, 9 points, great. So we're going to leave them in Cincinnati, in St. Louis. One thing you want to do, especially as the US, is you want to get these leaders into combat. You don't know who they are until they fight. So as attacker or defender, immediately on combat you flip and you find out who they are, because you want to find out your best two star leaders and get them in the positions where you're going to put your armies. So you have to get some. You have to kind of find out, who your generals are, what they're made of at this early point in the game. So you want to get them into action as quickly as possible. It's not so much the onus for the CSA because they're really on the defensive. So I kind of want to get that into combat, and I could risk it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could go into fight. I don't know exactly how many he's got there. I know he starts with 1, and I probably saw him adding, or at least pretending to add some during the setup from his free. So I don't know. So I don't know how many he's got. We're going into combat. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that activates untried leader, costs 2 CPs, so you just move it down on the track. So he's done the minimum of his bid, so we could stop there, but like I say, I want to make the most of the movement. I want to get these guys into action. So he's got 10. I don't want to go into Kentucky, give it to the CSA, because then they immediately get the rail net. So he's going to go on the rail net into Cairo, so that's another 2, and then I'm going to activate him to fight across there. It's going to be bad because I've got a river. Oh no, he's not. Yeah, he's not in a city or anything, so it might not be too bad. Is it a gap? No, I don't believe it is a gap. So that's, yeah, this is Harper's Ferry. So I got a low battery warning, so this is probably going to cut out soon. So that's 1, 2 more. So he's not actually moving, but he's activating to fight. Then movement done, we go to combat, and you can see I've got 3 more CPs to spend for the next 2 movement and combat phases. That's it, but it's expensive at the beginning. So let's do this combat first. So we reveal who the leaders are. And for the US, we've got McClellan, -2 skill, but he's a lovely 1 efficiency, so he's good at moving. So he's actually not the worst choice for an army leader at this point. And then we have Smith. So 0 skill, but nice low efficiency rating. So what do we have? So we have 3 versus 5. So because the attacker's got 5 strength points, that's in combat table B, and we've got 3 versus 5, which is only +2. We don't get up to 2 to 1. So we would roll 1d6, but we have the difference in skill ratings as a column shift. Now that's -2 for McClellan, so we're on this column. The defender's not in a fort. Fortunately, nobody's demoralised. But because we're going across a river, hang on, so that would give a +1 strength point to the defender, nominal strength points. So sorry, they were on 4 against 5, so we're actually on +1, and then -2 for McClellan. So that is where we are rolling. And because it's a minor river, the attacker's going to take an extra strength point loss, no matter what the result. And then we roll the d6, and that's short and sweet as the combat is. I get a 4, so we're on here on the -1. I roll 4, that's DD, so they're both disrupted or demoralised. And so no one's going to be moving anywhere. And we have to take 1 off McClellan because he has that penalty for trying his chances across the river. Okay, bad luck, but at least now, you see, so now we've revealed something. It's good for the CSA as well to know where their leaders are, but you can't help that. You want to get... So we got McClellan tagged as an efficient, if not so great, leader for an army. And he's got a seniority rating of 2, which you see in the top left-hand corner, which means that only Grant is going to be overrank him if they're in the same army and be the commander, and McClellan would be a subordinate like that or not. Okay, so that was okay. He's not fighting. Then here we have another scrap. So we've got 3 against 3, and it is A.P. Hill versus Hooker. Hooker's in his you can see the fan-made thing, it was black on black. 1 + 1 was black on his black shirt. You couldn't see it. Similar over here. So excuse my bad markings, but that's how I rectified it. So their skill ratings are the same, so there's no adjustment there. We're on the lower combat table A for the lower strength points. But the he's got +1 for being in a city to his nominal SP. So that's, we get 3 attacking, 4 SP, so that's on the -1, and no other adjustments. I rolled a 5, so again a DD. So on a 6 we would have got the defender would have been demoralised. The attacker or disrupted. The attacker would not have been, and although the attacker would have taken a strength point loss for attacking a city, the defender would have moved out a hex and the attacker could have moved in, taken it for 2 victory points, which would have been a nice start for the US, but it wasn't to be. We didn't know they had such strength there. Okay, so now it's the CSAs. Let's turn for this movement phase. They have 8, and I don't know. I don't think you can build a fort if you're demoralised. But anyway, this isn't the point for building fortifications. Yeah, you can't do that. I think for the first 3 turns, or at least the first 2. This isn't the time when we do it. Anyway, it happens in that reinforcement phase, which we've just been through before movement. So the CSA find... Now, one thing I didn't do was to consider if either of these was going to try that risky rally and potential death. Now you can see there's only these guys are both +1, so it would only be if they rolled a 2 would they die. They might get wounded though, removed from the board, and there's not a huge chance of rallying, so they're just going to be satisfied because if your opponent's demoralised as well or disrupted, you're not going to worry about him attacking you because the effects would cancel out. So the CSA are disappointed about that, but they do have points to use, and how could they profitably do so? I think they're going to move this fellow up here. And so we've now got 5 points there. Against, we know they start with 8 in Washington. So that was 2 points. So we're sort of defending Virginia there. These aren't doing much, so we can move 5. Let's threaten Charleston. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'll move. And I'll leave him there. That doesn't do anything. I'm just going to put him there. I'm ready to gain some more. So there's not so much you can do this first turn unless you kind of, except for I don't need a force there. So let's bring him up to there as well. So that's 1, 2. So essentially what that does is that the next turn on the reinforcements, you put your reinforcements in cities so they can be all together. Then I'll put a leader on and then we can move him, at least threaten some valley action. I might as well leave him there. He's defending. This isn't really doing anything there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's move him over. Okay, so we can get up to 5 points in Memphis. And that's another CP. I didn't need to spend all those, but seeing as the US had, I could have waited a bit more to see what he was doing. So then we go to the second movement phase, and the US is going to just consolidate some forces. I think he's going to put 1 and 1 from here, so 2 into Charleston and 2 here. So you move them on the railway lines. You can move on the railway lines straight into combat, but you get a -1 column shift in doing that. But you can shift forces quite nicely here. So the US keep 1 point spare for any emergency moves they have to make, and go over to the CSA. They spent 5, they've got 8. Contemplating an attack. It's sort of now or never. Let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's across the river. No, it's too costly, because across the river and he's in a city, you get both the detriments from those. So he would get +2 on his strength points, and I would get 2 SP losses minimum. But he's only got 1. I should have done it. Let's say we did it anyway. 1, 2, 3. We saw that the US had forgotten to add a reinforcement. So that's 2. We see what the leaders are that we have. Pemberton, terrible, -2. He goes up to -1 and his 2 efficiency. Goes up to -1 on his 2-star version, but the US are worse off in a way. Pope efficiency's good. That is seniority is 4. He's high up seniority. He's 2-star. You can't see that very well. It's blacked out. It should be blacked out, but it should be more visible than that. The fan-made chap made those white, but that doesn't time with what it says in the rules. So distinguishing between his white and yellow and the rules colour black or not black was too confusing for me, so I just blacked it in. What we have then is 5 SP versus nominal 3 SP, and then the differential is -1 benefit for the attacker, and we're attacking on combat table B. So what did I say? 5 versus 3, so we're on +2, then a bonus of 1, so we're on the 2 to 1, and oh dear, I rolled a 2. That's a nothing, but we take 2 losses for attacking across the river and into a city. So that was foolish, but all the fun of the fair. Okay, that's good. We got some leaders revealed. The US are happy for that as well. And the CSA are cursing their bad generalship. It says, actually, it's very interesting, in many games you wonder, who am I as the player? And in this game it says, right at the beginning, it says, you are the US player takes the role of President Abraham Lincoln. The CSA player takes the role of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. So, Jefferson, you're fired. And that's so then we got one more movement, and in this in the summer you saw nice movement 555 all along. The US have only 1 point left. They're going to quickly send that up to reinforce. It's zone of control. You can reinforce into a zone of control. Just flip that over so he's 2. That's all his CPs. The CSA likewise only have 1. Now could move AP Hill. No point because he's still in. He's 2, so we can't move him because his efficiency is too high. Can't move any of the unrevealed because that would cost 2. We could move Smith, but I don't want to, although I could potentially put him somewhere else, relocate him ready for putting a different leader, an untried one down there. Because I think what I'm going to want to do is pretty quickly promote Hill, Smith, sorry, and get an army into him because he's not terrible. He might be my best choice for an army leader. Early on, but I think he's fine where he is now. I think all we're going to do is move this fellow into there just to create some problems. That's the last CP, just to sort of stop them from pushing in so that the CSA kind of have a free route through there, or at least to threaten a free route through. So that's the all the movement, and then there's just 2 more phases. One is siege phase. Siege essentially happens if say if the attacker wasn't demoralized, he would move out and he would move into the hex. But because he's in a major city, it might happen in minor cities too. You can move into the city and be sieged, and then we would check how that works out in the siege phase now, at the end of the turn rather than during those movement phases. As you can tell, I didn't use that last game. I don't remember from my other games years ago. Then we go to the final game turn phase. So first we check to see if the CSA has it's 50 or more VPs, and the US they get immediate victory. No, sorry. If the Union has 50 more than the CSA, they win, and if at game turn they have 50 more, they have won. Otherwise, the CSA win. Then we check the victory differential, so doesn't come into play yet. Then we check foreign intervention. So if the CSA has 30 more victory points, foreign intervention happens. US get NRPs halved, the CSA gets a couple of extra reinforcements, 3 each per turn, and all further US sea assaults, sea transport costs doubled, and the blockade phase is skipped, so they cannot use that anymore. Now, if it's game turn 12 or later, the West Virginians join the Union. We skip this, otherwise we check that if player rolls 2 dice and modifies the score, so I rolled 6, 7, 8, subtract the number of the game turn and the number of US land SPs in West Virginia. Well, at the moment, now I've just reinforced it, that's 4, the game turn 1, so I subtract 5, so I'm on 3. If the modified result is 3 or greater, nothing happens. If it's 2 or less, West Virginia joins the Union. That's a very neat and simple way of figuring out. So, you know, if the USA fortify that, bring in garrison it nicely, and the CSA do nothing about it. Sooner or later, West Virginia will go to the Union. Now the CSA player attempts to trace their line of communication trans-Mississippi. We've got that, so they get 1 victory point. Woohoo! And then each person checks to see if he occupies any enemy cities. No, and no, and it wasn't happening there anyway. So that hasn't happened yet. Otherwise you would get the victory points for them at this point. Then we return the CP markers from our track. Took them off here. Put them back in the cup and shuffle them around, ready to draw them for the command phase at the first point of next turn, and then we move on a turn. You can see in the original game, turn moves on and you have tons of numbers with the key for it there, but that's all the movement allowances per movement phase, numbers of reinforcements, NRPs, etc., and the US and the cavalry things, and the Trans-Mississippi bonus, all those things helpfully listed a bit more clearly here. I mean, it's worked fine there. It's, you know, I've played it before and it's fine as long as you're sitting at that side. But I needed this side because before I sort of generally as a solo player work with the underdog, so I kind of generally root for the CSA, so I put more effort into them as a solo player. But that often means the CSA win, and not just this game, but other American Civil War strategic games I play. And so this last game, this one, and probably the next, I'm rooting for the North, so I needed really to sit this side. That's not visible. You'd need your CSA player to, well, it is visible, but it's not easily readable. You'd need your opponent to call it out to you otherwise. So this is invaluable. Thank you so much for the chap who did those. And that's it. That's a turn. And I will wrap it up there for now, because this has probably gone on far too long and hardly anyone will watch this. It's over an hour. But, well, there you go. That is the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865 game.